Trafficking is difficult to define when it comes to organs because it can happen in a number of forms. As you've heard, you can bring people to the place where potential recipients want their organs. So you can literally traffic in the movement of people. You can also traffic in the movement of organs. You get rid of the people and you move the organs around, which has some advantages for the traffickers. The control of the organs is better. Has some disadvantage in that organs are frail and they need to use them relatively quickly for transplant purposes, limits to some extent what you can do in terms of storing different types of organs. There's also the possibility of bringing the person to the organ or to the potential donor. That's transplant tourism. And so each one of those forms, moving people, moving organs, and moving potential recipients to where an organ supply might be being generated through some form of trafficking, each one of those has to be tracked.
A number of years ago, a patient of mine, who we've been following on our list for a number of years, came in having just gotten a transplant. And this was a surprise to us because we hadn't transplanted her. She was a young Chinese-American woman. And I said, oh, where were you transplanted? She said, China. And I said, oh, who was your donor, a cousin or a relative? She said, no, I got my organ from an executed prisoner. This is a photograph of an execution ground in China. There are upwards of 69 offenses in China which are considered capital offenses and therefore potentially punishable by death. Most of the executions are carried out with a single gunshot to the back of the head, and then, as you see, the photographer here is documenting the execution of the prisoner. The problem of kidney failure in China, as it is in most of the world, is a very significant one. The incidence is thought to be about 100 per million population, so therefore in China, with its huge population, there are at least 120,000 new patients who go into kidney failure each year. Officially, there are only about 1,000 kidney transplants reported in 2001, but it's likely that the actual number of kidney transplants performed in China is much greater, at least 5 or 6 times greater. Because of cultural prohibitions, the incidence of living donors is actually relatively small. So the vast majority of these are actually deceased donor transplants. This is one of the main transplant hospitals in China. So on investigation, I was contacted by some journalists, and we sort of dug into it together, and it culminated in this article in the Village Voice all about the use of prisoner organs for transplantation. These are 2 prisoners, they were murderers actually, who were taken to be executed in May of 1999. The families of these prisoners were not notified that the execution was going to occur, and by the time they found out about it, they rushed to the execution grounds, where the only thing that they could find was the shoe of one of the prisoners, which is what that person is holding there. There were several eyewitnesses, however, to the execution who said that the prisoners, after they were executed, were placed into 2 large white vehicles with windows and the license plate blocked out. And then they sped off. Some of the eyewitnesses followed the vehicles, and at one point some debris was thrown out of the back of one of them, which, as you can see, in addition to the box of cigarettes at the top, is surgical gloves and some surgical gauze, and then a couple of bottles of or plastic bags of IV fluid, which on closer examination turned out to be organ preservation fluid. The kidneys and then the prisoners were subsequently taken to this hospital where all of the kidneys were transplanted, and the bodies of the prisoners were taken to the crematorium. The families of the prisoners were both sued the government as well as the hospital, but those cases were thrown out.
The problem with trafficking is that it slides off into a 4th type of problem, which is markets. So there are many parts of the world where somebody might say, we don't traffic, we pay people. It's not trafficking, it's simply we hire people, they give their consent, and the system is as it is. And worldwide, there has been increasing momentum to try and legalize markets in organs, sometimes in poor nations, sometimes in rich nations. Can you actually regulate a market? Well, I don't think so. I think what you get in the countries that have made efforts to have markets, India and Iran being two, is that basically brokers run it, the government isn't much in evidence, and when people have gone to follow up, when people have sold kidneys in India, for example, what you find is they started out dirt poor, they ended up dirt poor, they just ended up a lot sicker. People who are dirt poor to begin with don't find the kind of money they get for selling their parts sufficient to elevate them out of poverty, and part of the problem they have is that they're poor and illiterate, and being poor and illiterate with a little money doesn't mean that you're going to keep it. So the ability to, in a sense, work your way up, one of the defenses that is used to legitimate markets, I don't think holds. There's not much evidence for that.
I was one of those passionate people on the International Transplantation Society Ethics Committee, helping the transplant professionals in India to bring about laws against selling and buying of organs. And that was successfully accomplished. But an activity that was being done on the open suddenly went underground. The kidney brokers are still there, and the poor are still being exploited. And what has happened is that the activity goes on until the enforcers, the police, stop getting their cut out of this, and then they suddenly come in and start arresting people. I think that what we got to do is somehow take out the exploitation of the poor and somehow develop a legal framework where the activity can be transparent, done according to rules, as is happening in this country. Every transplant that is done, right from the one that Dr. Murray did in 1954 to the one that I did 2 days ago, all of those transplants are registered.
But here's the last thing I want you to really think about, probably the core argument. Remember I said informed choice. The person still can make a choice. Who are you do-goodniks from the UN or the Council of Europe, not me, but these kind of people, to come in and say they can't sell their parts or their tissues? Well, I might believe it. If I believe poor people can be rational, that's true. But that ignores the core question. What are the alternatives? It's one thing, part of informed choice is to be able to make a decision. But part of it is to have options. If I strip you naked and put you in the middle of a big desert, I could say, well, look, you're autonomous. Do what you want. Here, I'm not hindering you. You can be anything you want to do. Go have a good time. Assumedly, choice requires some options and alternatives. The poorest of the poor, whether they're in Europe or the US or in poor nations in other countries, they don't have any choices. No one's going to have their leg lopped off or sell off a piece of their, sell a cornea or sell out a kidney. They have any reasonable choice at all about ways to make a living. The poor have no alternatives. They're not making choices. They are still being exploited even with their consent. So my last comment today, for now, is to say trafficking, I think, has to include the very poor. It's one thing for the middle class and upper class person to say, I'm going to sell a kidney. You show me one who's going to do it, and I'll be very impressed. But maybe they could make a choice, and maybe we could have a market there. We all know where the market is going to go. It's going to go from the very poor, trading organs, up to the rich. It's going to go from the underdeveloped world into the developed world. It's not going to be easy to regulate, and no one will care to, because it's going to be in the hands of brokers, and they're going to exploit people. And to cover that up and say, well, that's choices, people don't have to do this, I think ignores the fact that if you have no options or alternatives, then you don't have any choices.